Perfect. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us in this breakout session focusing on environment and sustainability. As Joe mentioned, I am Gabriel, the MBB Senior Executive responsible for Sustainable Development. Today with me, I have Stephanie, Policy Advisor for Energy and Environment at EUROCHAMBRES. It's encouraging to see a good number of people in this session focusing on an important topic, and I know some of you who are experts in your respective fields, so I'm confident that there's going to be a healthy discussion and some key points to take away in the next 30 to 45 minutes. We're going to start off with a very brief presentation by Stephanie to sort of set the stage and introduce what the EU is doing in terms of legislative proposals and strategies in this area. And then we will move on to a discussion between all of us through a set of questions which we have already prepared prior to this meeting. So Stephanie, the floor is yours. I think you should be able to share your screen.
Yes, hello, good morning to everybody. Thanks for the nice introduction, Gabrielle, and for the invitation generally. And thanks to the audience for choosing this session. I know it was quite a tough choice to make, but I think you did a good choice. And I will now try to share my screen. Just give me a second. Okay, I guess you should be seeing it, right?
Yes, Stephanie.
Okay, I'm sorry, I don't know why I'm also in the picture. This is not intended by me, but I cannot change this now. Yeah, well, I was already introduced. I am the Policy Advisor for Environment and Energy at EUROCHAMBRES, and I will try to give you an overview, let's say, of what is going on in the sustainability field, which is quite a lot in the recent years. That it was never that high on the agenda, I would say, as it is now. And I think we should just jump into the topic right away. So, of course, I will start with kind of giving you the overall vision that the EU has when it comes to sustainability, which is the European Green Deal. And if we want to go even one level higher, let's say, this is kind of the translation, the EU translation from the Paris Agreement from 2015, where almost all the countries of the world agreed to limit global warming to 2 degrees or even 1.5 if possible. So, and this was then kind of the translation of the European Union with the overall target to become climate neutral by 2050. And to do so, we need to tackle almost all of the economic sectors. You can see these in the little green boxes. Zero pollution, it's about biodiversity, farm to fork, which is about agriculture and the food system. It's about smart mobility, of course, the transport sector, which is of huge concern at EU level. If we go further on the left side, it's about building and renovating, so the building stock of the EU, which is today quite energy inefficient, 2/3. So this is also a big challenge. It's about industry to become clean and circular, and energy. Maybe I should have started at this side because I always think that energy is kind of the basis for everything, or for big parts of all the other sectors, let's say. So if we decarbonize energy, we decarbonize already quite a huge part of the economy. And all this needs to be done in a fair manner, and it needs to be financed. But I think we will get back to the finance aspect quite sometimes. And the climate ambition that comes out of this Green Deal communication, let's say, was then implemented via the 2030 Climate Target Plan, because the Commission, several studies, let's say, pointed towards a need to increase the current climate target in place to be on track to reach climate neutrality by 2050. So this was the reason why the 2030 goals were updated to a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions of 55% by 2030. This was before 40%. So this is now the new proposal from the Green. Well, this is not a proposal anymore. This is already put into law. but this will now need to be implemented, which will be much harder than taking the decision for the goal itself. It will, main energy uses and sources of emissions are the buildings, transport and industry sector, which are also the ones that we will look a bit more into detail afterwards. And to give you another, maybe a bit confusing name now, the Fit for 55 package, which is basically just called the package of legislative files that were now reopened, let's say, or some of them are new, to deliver on this new 2030 goal. Just one slide ahead, here we have it. So the package of legislative files to reach that 55% emission reduction by 2030. The Commission already published part of it in July. A second bunch of legislative files will be upcoming in December. And it's a comprehensive and interconnected set of proposals, which is seen positively mostly, as it really tackles the whole, the whole economy. It includes many different sectors, again, energy, industry, buildings, transport, agriculture, and land, to name the biggest ones. And it is now up to discussion. So maybe this is an important disclaimer. All the things that I'm going to introduce and to present to you now are proposals. Nothing of these, or almost nothing of these, are decided yet, because this is now the ongoing negotiation process on EU level between Parliament and Council, which will take at least some 2 years, suggestions say. But the one or the other form, as I'm presenting it, it might be implemented in the end, just for you to know that it's not finally decided. And also important, I will take a more, let's say, objective, explanatory role. Sometimes I will give already some assessment, let's say, from EUROCHAMBRES, but it will be more an introduction now to begin with. And now I would like to go a bit more in detail of the most important sectors, let's say, and have a look at what is planned there. Let's start with the energy sector, which is, as I already mentioned before, kind of the basis of our modern economy. We, of course, also don't want to compromise any of that. It plays into each of the economic sectors that we will also have a look at after, like buildings, industry, mobility. So it has a huge multiplier effect. And its importance is also shown by the first number that you can see. Production and use of energy across sectors is responsible for 75, a bit more, % of EU-wide greenhouse gas emissions. So this is a huge number, and by decarbonizing this energy supply, we decarbonize already a big part of the economy. Just for information, the remaining greenhouse gas emissions in the economy are mostly process related from industry, or it's non-CO2 emissions from agriculture and waste. So this is a big part methane, for example. A big part of the decarbonization of the energy system that the EU is striving for will happen by electrification. So it will be around 65%, studies say. The leading energy carrier will be electricity, which also comes naturally because of its intrinsic efficiency advantage towards other forms of energy. But of course, it will also be significant, the role that will be played by other renewable and low carbon gaseous fuels. So biomass will play an important role, renewable gases generally, hydrogen, of course. One key principle for the EU is energy efficiency. So this is also now tried to put into law, a real energy efficiency first principle. Because it's the argument that each kilowatt hour, let's say, of energy that we don't use is the best energy, kind of. And then, of course, this needs to be coupled with the rest of the energy that we will need, of course, in our modern economies will need to come from renewable deployment. And this will need to accelerate tremendously. Yes, so if we want to reach our renewable energy goals, renewable installations need to accelerate quickly during the next 10 years. I think it's something like triple from the speed that we had during the last 10 years. And it's also interesting to look at the numbers for the EU. It would be a kind of a doubling of today's share of renewable energy, which is around 20%. And we want to come to go to 40% by 2030. And for Malta, but please correct me if I'm wrong, from the numbers that I saw, it's a current share of around 9% of renewables in the energy supply. And the current proposal on EU level would foresee a share of 27%. So it's a tripling, which is, of course, not an easy goal to reach, not at all. Renewables from offshore will play a big role in this. And what is also important, if we want renewables to take over, this needs to be aligned with the grid implementation, a better integrated European energy system, much more interconnection from production hotspots to consumption hotspots. It needs more flexibility due to the production patterns of renewables, and so on and so forth. So if we go to the next sector, that's the industry sector. Industry currently accounts for approximately 20% of EU's greenhouse gas emissions. And if we look at industry, it's mostly about two issues. It's about the energy input and the resources. So we want to reach both. We want to make industry clean. So again, it's about decarbonizing energy supply and circular. Studies, let's say, here assume that industry will decarbonize in equal parts by energy efficiency, electrification, and hydrogen. Some industrial actors for sure would be telling me now that they don't see really how to reach more energy efficiency. Of course, depending on the sector and depending on the member states, many industrial companies reach their, let's say, the cap of energy efficiency potentials. So then here, a next step will also be technology shifts. So different sectors will change towards new technology, manufacturing technology, like for example in the steel sector. This will change to a new process where they include this, which includes hydrogen. With hydrogen at the moment, the issue, of course, is that it's mostly produced from fossil fuels, over 90%. And what is the EU is trying to scale up hydrogen. There is a goal at EU level of 40 gigawatt renewable hydrogen production capacity by 2030. It's only focused on renewable hydrogen, which we now, to already give some assessment from our side, see difficult because we think in the short and medium term to make it cost efficient as soon as possible and to make the necessary amount of hydrogen affordable to companies available in the near future, we should possibly not narrow it down to renewable hydrogen only, but also leave possibility for using, making it from gas together with carbon capture, use or storage, things like that. So to leave it more technology neutral in a sense. One main instrument so far for industry sector to decarbonize was the emission trading scheme. Just shortly explained, it basically puts a carbon price on a ton of CO2. So and a cap on all the CO2 emissions altogether on EU level. So then with the perspective of rising CO2 prices, companies see an incentive to invest in more energy efficient equipment, for example, or to change their technology. And this has achieved quite some good high achievements. This is now under discussion to be extended to other sectors, but we will come back to that when we come to those other sectors. And the other issue is to make products become more sustainable. So to make them become circular, to move away from take, make, dispose economy, let's say, to a circular economy. At the moment, it's around 12% of all the used materials that are recycled materials. So most of it is still primary materials, and there we need to move to make products more sustainable altogether. this will come with certain requirements on producers to make their products more sustainable, make them more circular, provide products as a service, possibly offering course important is to ensure competitiveness of businesses. And this is a huge concern, which is recognized at EU level, and then it's tried to be tackled. I mean, for example, when it comes to the CO2 price, there are certain industry sectors that are exempted from buying these CO2 emission allowances, let's say, so that they don't have the disadvantage when it comes to global trade. But this is now under the new proposal something that would be phased out, which is of course worrying a lot industry. Yeah, and there's another proposal, let's say, to tackle the issue of carbon leakage, which is exactly that problem that companies might relocate their production towards outside of the EU in order to have more easier rules on CO2 and environment. And to tackle this, the EU has also a new proposal, but I think we might come to that later on. It's the carbon border adjustment mechanism. We could go into a bit more detail later. But it's definitely that we need to make sure that companies stay within the European territory. We need to maintain our industry strong and competitive within the EU. And this will be a huge discussion in the upcoming years, how to ensure this. So coming to the next sector already, I hope I'm good in time.
Maybe we can wrap up in about 3 minutes, Stephanie, so we have enough time for questions and the discussion.
I'll make it quick then from here. The mobility and transport sector, it's interesting because I had a look in the Maltese Recovery and Resilience Fund, and you put quite a lot of money into the uptake of electric cars. So mobility is important in Malta. Road transport is responsible for 20% of EU greenhouse gas emissions, and to reach the 2050 climate neutrality targets, it must be reduced by about 90%. And this must be done via a mix of efficiency improvements. So the EU is here also proposing that by 2030, only zero emission cars can be sold on the European market, which would basically only allow for electric vehicles anymore, which is of course also very controversially discussed. Hydrogen will also play a role here for heavy duty transports, aviation, maritime sector. And the new emission trading system is now under discussion to be expanded for the transport sector, so that in future fuel suppliers would need to buy a certain CO2 price on the fuel, which of course would very possibly translate into higher fuel prices. But we can get back to that in the discussion. Last sector is the buildings sector, especially the heating and cooling, which is responsible for 36% of greenhouse gas emissions in the EU, so also quite a huge number. And as I said before, 75% even of buildings are inefficient at the moment. This is also a part of Maltese Recovery and Resilience Funds to put something into some funds into the renovation of buildings. We need to double the renovation rate at EU level, let's say. What is important here possibly is that with the buildings renovation, you tackle various issues at once. You have higher energy efficiency, which leads to lower heating bills, lower greenhouse gas emissions. And what is important here is possibly that this is generating local jobs and GDP, as the construction sector is very locally normally and with a lot of SMEs included. Also here, the new emission trading system is under discussion to be applied on the buildings, on the heating and cooling supply for buildings. So again, this might be translated into higher bills, heating bills for consumers, again, highly politically controversial. Okay, and this is my last slide. I tried to just wrap it up again because it's quite some information to put some of the building blocks for the transformation here. I mean, happy to discuss these, to add some more or to delete some of the others. It will definitely be about investment. I mean, I could have mentioned investment during each of the other sectors, of course. It will be the one and only thing that needs to be available, that needs to be done right. We need huge amounts, which will partly be given from the public sector, but the huge part of it, the bigger part of it, will need to come from the private sector. And there it needs to be attractive and economically viable for companies to do these investments, which is currently quite difficult. We can come back to that. I was already mentioning the sufficient and affordable supply of renewable energy, because if we want our companies to change, to do the shift, they need to have affordable energy and sufficient renewable energy at hand. It's about technology and R&D, because in many fields we still need developments. We depend on technologies that are not yet mature, that need still to be developed, especially in circular economy agenda with recycling. It's about infrastructure, again, also here with renewable energy that needs to take over, about cooperation with other member states within the EU, but also with third country states. And the EU is also trying here to push forward a high climate diplomacy agenda. And competitiveness. I put it here as the last point, but I mean, from a business's perspective, of course, it could be put right second after the investment. So we need to stay competitive, our industry especially, to also maintain our economic power at the global level, let's say. So, okay, I'll leave it here. Sorry if it was a bit rushed. I hope it was still useful to get a good overview and to get the discussion started. I'm just to a last sentence, I'm really happy to have you here and to hear your points of view, also to really hear from the businesses how they see the different measures taken by the EU, let's say. So happy to hear your opinions.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. That was a lot to cover in a relatively short amount of time, so well done. I don't know if there are already some reactions to the proposals which Stephanie has mentioned. I saw that Patrick raised his hand through Zoom. Do you have a comment or a question?
Yes, I wanted to point out, first and foremost, thank you very much for the presentation. But with regards to renewable energy in Malta, it is not possible to triple the 9% that we currently have, simply because we don't have the space on the island. We are currently at around between 9 and 10%, and I believe the optimum we can probably hit is maybe 15. More than 15% is not possible because the island has got a very finite size, 300 square kilometers. A lot of it is already constructed and most of these roofs are taken up. So unless we think outside the box, I very much doubt that the island can hit a renewable target of more than 15% at max.
Yes, in fact, Patrick, that's one of the questions that we had prepared, was the EU is obviously very ambitious when it comes to increasing the share of renewable energy, including for Malta and other territories which are faced with these geographical challenges. And we dedicated a question to that discussion, which we'll get to in a couple of minutes.
Okay,
yeah.
Thank you.
We can get back to that, yeah.
Yes. Something. Are there any other comments, or can we move on to the questions? Okay. So, Cynthia, can you please share your screen? Was basically we prepared a series of questions on a platform called Mentimeter. It's used to gather your feedback and have live results on screen. So what I kindly ask you is either go to your phone or to a separate computer or wherever and access the questions. Okay, I think most of us are accessing the question, so maybe we can move on to the first question. Next slide, please, Cynthia. Okay, so now the screen's changed on your mobile or wherever you're accessing the question. The first two questions will serve as a sort of icebreaker for us to understand what we mean, what each of us understands by sustainability or environmental protection in the EU context. So you have a text box and just type out a word which either concerns the topic that you are most interested in when it comes to environmental protection, sustainability. Yes, we already have some answers. So leadership, direction, facilitation. Would any of you be interested in explaining what you mean by these different sort of values or issues? So for example, direction. I don't know who typed that one out.
I typed that out. Direction, because as part of the EU has to give us direction with regards to the priorities, the areas which we need to address, and this is the first thing that comes to my mind when we mention the EU's role in environmental protection and sustainability.
Yes, and we see leadership, which is similar to your point on direction. Incentives. So I think here we're also introducing the financial sort of aspect to helping industry, the public sector, or citizens in actually embracing this greener future. Okay. I think we can move on to the next question, Cynthia, please. Now, obviously, when it comes to setting environmental targets, there's always a controversial sort of debate on whether the target should be higher, should be lower. So it's a matter of ambition. Even within across the institutions themselves, you have certain EU institutions which want higher targets. There are other institutions that favor lower targets. In your own opinions, are EU targets that Stephanie has just presented, are they ambitious, too ambitious, or not ambitious enough? And then if any of you would like to explain sort of your answer, please feel free.
I'd like to ask, with regards to the EU level targets or the local targets for Malta?
Mainly on the EU level targets, but if you'd like to pass on a comment that relates to both, it's very welcome.
Okay.
There is a hand raised. I see. I don't know if you see it.
Yes, Conrad, please.
Okay.
Hi, good morning. Yes, I come from the mobility industry, so I would dare say that the European Union is quite ambitious there when we look at it from our context, but even on a global context. I think one of the things that I see lacking, and that's why I put the word even leadership before, is that we set very long-term, relatively long-term targets, 2030, 2050, and so on, which is very good because it gives very clear direction where we're going. But sometimes I think certain countries, and I would dare say Malta would be one of them, would need a bit of direction on closer targets to be able to reach that final target. Because if it's a very ambitious target, and that's I think where we need to go in terms of mobility, sometimes it's so far away that without setting closer targets, especially with political contexts where governments change every 5 years, it would help if there were shorter targets to monitor on a regular basis rather than so long term.
Yes, I think that makes sense. And even, correct me if I'm wrong, Stephanie, but I think the approach now has been sort of to focus on the end goal of 2050, but setting intermediary targets. So you have 2030 and 2035. But to be fair, 2030 and 2035 are still a long way to go.
For
so
some
maybe...
people, it's like a lifetime away. It's so far away.
Yes.
It's too hard to digest, when you talk about 2030, 2035, even people sitting in an office or people sitting at policy level. I mean, no matter how strategic you try to be, especially in the current circumstances, you might look at 3 to 5 years, and beyond that becomes, okay, we'll sort it out later. And I know it sounds very odd, but it's the truth.
No, no, it's true.
I
Even,
worked in government for 10 years in transport division, and you see it. It's inevitable. So maybe if the Commission would give us a guideline, you know, what targets could be realistic, and country by country, region by region, because I mean you cannot compare Malta with Germany and whatnot. So it could really help, I think, especially mobility. I'm not sure about the other sectors, maybe as well, given what Patrick mentioned before.
I think it's a very valid point, because I think it comes a bit, as was mentioned before, with the direction also, because now in the mobility sector also, I mean, we will agree on that the big part will be electric vehicles, but then if it comes, for example, to hydrogen, we don't yet really know exactly what the role will be, how much hydrogen will be available. There is a target for 2030, but as you say, I mean, we don't know, will we get there? When will it be 29 that we will build most of it? Will we have it earlier? So it's about technology, where to go. I think it's a very valid point. Yeah.
Patrick, I saw that you raised your hand.
Yes, I just would like to, I agree with what was just mentioned, but I'd like to mention 2 points. One is that we are looking at the 2030 targets. However, the next 2 years are negotiation to establish, if I understood correctly, the targets for our country or for each territory. So that leaves then 7 years, doing which one or even less has to actually attain that target. In some areas, as was just mentioned by Stephanie, the technology is still being developed. In other areas, the technologies exist. So I think that having a deadline like the 2030 across the board on some issues may be even too far away. And on some issues, it may be actually too close. So this tends to the overall feeling then becomes, if you were giving targets which cannot be attained, then why bother? So I think this gives sometimes the wrong message.
Very valid point. Thank you, Patrick, and thank you to all who contributed to this question. Next question, please, Cynthia. Okay, so obviously we can all speak about sort of our drive and our intention to increase either the energy efficiency of our business, the sustainability, and contribute towards climate neutrality, which is the end goal of the European Union. But realistically, all businesses will face some kind of challenges or barriers when it comes to implementing these measures. Here we have included a list of different options for you to choose, identifying which barriers you think are most important or most challenging when it comes to implementing these changes. Or otherwise, if none of these apply to you, we can choose other and explain your different opinion. Okay, we already have 2 non-conformists. So who would like to take the stage and explain their position first?
I'll step in. Obviously, I chose other because, first of all, I'm not a business owner. But the point I want to make has more to do with the policy perspective. Mm-hmm. So I think a great example of a very profound problem is the EU's agricultural policy. So the European Court of Auditors said that since 2010, 100 billion being spent on agriculture to lower emissions has yielded no reductions in emissions since 2010. So I think that might be the most extreme example of having, let's say, an incorrectly designed policy package. But this problem can be felt on all levels, and certainly in Malta. We can preach in one area, but at the same time, you'll have a massive environmental problem in another area, or just too many interests pulling too many different ways, and ultimately a very well-intended policy package can fall apart because of a few elements which might interfere or interests.
Thank you very much, Tim. Yes, very good point. Agriculture is a key issue when it comes to sort of improving the sustainability of the whole EU continent. We have 2 other replies who chose other.
I can go, Conrad. Sorry, I was looking where to press. Go, Patrick.
As you wish. I wrote other because in actual fact, the options are, you can only select one, where in reality, there are at least 2, possibly 3 options, which are all contributing towards the problems that businesses face. I agree that lack of knowledge and awareness of the instruments, and also clumsy and very time-consuming administrative procedures. But one which isn't mentioned here is the economic situation. So if we look at the reality we are surrounded today, we are hopefully climbing out of a COVID pandemic, which has created economic problems. As a result, these economic problems could be due to logistic problems. They could be due to various other problems. But if there isn't enough given in terms of financial support, many companies are looking to survive, not to improve their performance. If you cannot improve a performance of a company, it is going to go bust because of external measures which have created problems. So I think this sometimes is overlooked. We are assuming that all companies are, healthy and looking to grow. Some companies may be healthy, but they're still looking to survive given the current economic scenario that we have. So I think financial incentives and support with reduced administrative procedures and higher awareness are all important.
Thank you very much, Patrick. I think Conrad wanted to add to this.
Yes, very quickly. I agreed with Patrick, especially on the administrative processes. I mean, it's like it's designed to discourage people from applying sometimes. But one additional point that I would share, maybe coming from mobility, is incentives for users. The success of any measure in mobility and transport doesn't just depend on the business. We can invest in, coming from our company here, in the best and most the cleanest fleet, which is in fact included in the program, the RF funds. However, if we don't have incentives for people out there to shift from using their car to using other modes of transport, it won't be enough. It can be as attractive as it is, but it's not enough. So maybe one point we can make is that if there are incentives designed specifically for the users out there, not just the businesses will enjoy then the benefit of the users using the service itself. So if there are incentives for people to use greener transportation, for example, it benefits both the user and the business.
Yes. Laura, I think you're muted. I don't know if you wanted to pass a comment.
This is right. Okay. Yes, so I totally agree with Mr. Patrick, because even me, it's been hard to pick one, because it's a process to implement. It's not just one luck. It's a combination of luck. But I think so when a business improved and when increased energy efficiency or climate neutrality, is not just the business that could have a benefit, but is a common good. So this is why incentive are, is a help, but for the community, because if someone reduces CO2, it's not just, okay, you are good, you have a good image, you are take care about environmental, the community directly benefit. Yes. So it's a common good. And put only on business the responsibility to make investment or make the transition or shift business model, I think is too much. And it's not fair, because we cannot just a consumer, just wait for you if you decide to be more energy efficiency or to reduce CO2 or not. So has to be. And in that case, the administrative procedure or government law has to be very clear in this sense. I don't know if it has been clear.
Yes, it's making sense, Laura. Very, very good
if
point.
It makes sense, I don't know.
Yes, that's a very good point. unfortunately, we only have time for one more question, despite having a couple more, because the time is almost up. So next slide, please, Cynthia, and I'd appreciate brief answers in our interventions. So this is a point which actually Patrick already mentioned during Stephanie's presentation, that we're seeing an increased push towards renewable energies from Brussels. But at the end of the day, some regions are tied by their own geographical limitations, especially in Malta, where space is limited. And I'd say the most promising solution would be solar, but again, you need space for solar. How do you think should the EU account for these different geographical and even technological limitations across its regions?
Mhm.
Would anyone like to explain the last answer, the tailored regional strategies?
Well, that was mine. It's pretty
Yes.
much what has been said before, that you can't have a macro catch-all solution and expect everyone to, go by the same solutions. And I mean, even with the carbon border adjustment mechanism, it has been pointed out how Malta will be hit unfairly compared to other countries. So, I mean, I put that the EU is not ambitious enough at the most extreme, and I'm still saying that, because it's no use sabotaging an economy which will no longer be competitive. If you want it to succeed in a sustainable way, you have to look at local solutions.
Yes. And to be fair, I think the EU does try to take that approach by setting different targets according to different member states. So if there's a 40% reduction target, not every single member state has a 40% target. But
I wouldn't say just for targets though, but also perhaps in the ways that they can help a country, the instruments.
Well, I think the instrument, sorry, Stephanie?
No, please go ahead. I can go after you.
I was going to say, I think the instruments are focusing more on the level of economic development than actually sort of tackling particular issues in that region.
Yeah, I would argue that the EU needs more authority, more policy instruments in hand to be able to step in and assist.
Please, Stephanie. Yes.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with what was said. I think technology will play a role, but I think in this case, it should also be about partnerships, because as you say, you will just be limited geographically as long as there is not a new technology using wave economically viable, let's say, it will be almost impossible. And the EU is trying, let's say, for example, by obliging or proposing to oblige member states to do partnerships between the different states on renewable energy. By 2025, they need to have one project at least. This is the proposal. But there it seems that there is a lot of reluctance from the different member states. But I think this will need to be the way forward, to be more integrated, to use potential from other countries. And then it needs to be transported to the countries that have less opportunities.
Yes. Very, very valid points. Thank you, Stephanie, and thank you, Tim. I think we should be transported back to the plenary session any minute now, automatically, but I think the other breakout rooms are still going on. So maybe I can pose another question, and then if the discussion ends abruptly, you will know why. It's because we're back at the plenary. What I'd like to ask now is that obviously the EU is pushing to increase the sustainability of its products and its service in a wholesale approach, so down to its manufactured products, its transport, its energy. But the reality is that, and something which you have already mentioned, is that unsustainable practices from outside Europe still exist. So sort of there's the risk of carbon leakage, as Stephanie mentioned, where businesses will just either import their products from outside Europe or actually produce them in factories where the environmental standards are not as strict. What do you think should the EU do to account for this sort of challenge? Because at the end of the day, if you're just shifting emission production from one place to another, you're not really solving any problem. You're not solving the problem. Cynthia, could you just change the slide, please? I think you stopped sharing your screen, Cynthia.
But we can still answer in the
yes, if you have any replies, we can just answer here. If anyone would like to take the floor and start explaining their answers.
Great. Well, one point, well, obviously we've got the carbon border adjustment mechanism, but something that the EU could quite easily do, which I think is extremely necessary, otherwise all our efforts will be in vain. For example, look at the Brazilian beef produced as a result of Amazon deforestation. There should be a blanket ban to pressure these countries into not producing these products, at the very least. You know, I mean, what's the point of cutting down our emissions and sweating and going through the trouble for decades, only to have all our work undermined by one trading partner who we're unwilling to play tough with? So, of course, that will affect some businesses more than others, but so at some point, some extremely tough decisions need to be made.
Thank you, Tim. Any other comments?
I have one shortly. I just want to highlight what was just said by Timothy. I think it's super important. It's a point that we always try to push for at EU level, also kind of in the form of a global CO2 price, let's say, because I mean, it's even though we have many countries on a global scale that are more and more committed to certain climate goals, they are not at all as advanced as the European Union is. And we are much more on implementation already, whereas others are only committing. So there's a huge gap. And as long as we don't have certain measures or globally fair measures, it will always be a disadvantage for European companies. So the EU should put every effort into diplomacy with other countries and taking them on board.
I agree, but obviously I think that diplomacy has to also be coupled with incentives to actually support, especially if these countries are less developed than the EU. And we have to remember that most EU countries have already gone through the process of economic development and modernizing their economies. And in the past, it was the EU countries who had unsustainable practices, and now they have modernized. So sort of some other countries are still going through that process.
While that is true, I will add one thing, that you're encouraging them to grow their economy on unsustainable behavior, which will ultimately bite them in the ass as well.
Yes.
They won't be able to continue that development.
I think we should couple it with incentives, because then you have
definitely.
You have countries like China, for example, where they don't really care about the environmental aspect of your production and even the human rights aspect of your business, while they're giving countries funds. So sort of it's a bit of a challenge for the EU to convince some countries to increase the sustainability of their own operations if they're not giving them some incentive to help them. Okay. All right. I think this is your point, right, Tim, on the Brazilian? Yes. All right. Let me just check the time. So I think we have time for the last question. So next slide, please, Cynthia. So we talked about a lot of different measures and incentives and investments that businesses can undertake in order to improve the efficiency and the sustainability of their operations. If you had to choose one preferred form of investment or incentives to support investment, which would it be? So you have bank financing, which is a sort of a traditional form of financing, like you're getting loans. You have government tax credits, but unfortunately, I think a lot of government schemes are in the form of tax credits, especially at Malta Enterprise. You have EU funds, company funds, which are the company's own finances, or else some sort of special purpose vehicle or dedicated financial instruments that work on that specific area, or else other, which someone has already chosen. So who'd like to explain their choice, please?
Sorry, it's me again.
Yeah.
I believe that the most effective for businesses is grants. Okay. Because we have seen this, I'm involved in a number of areas. Tax credits are not always that interesting, especially since certain sectors that already are swimming in tax credits. EU funds are extremely difficult for small companies to tap into, and you cannot take a business decision on the possibility of getting a fund. You need to take a business decision on something which you are almost certain you're going to get. Company funds are always lacking. Banks have become extremely difficult to deal with. And the SPVs work maybe potentially for large renewable energy investments, not for smaller energy efficiency type investments. So I believe that it's grants which ultimately are coming out of EU funds, but not direct application for EU funds. It needs to be something local and with low administrative difficulties.
Thank you, Patrick.
Yes, I would add, yes, grant based on technology. So based on measure, because I worked in Italy when there was the grant based for energy efficiency measure. So people or business, they do something else. Maybe they don't have knowledge about windows or about a specific heating system or cooling system. So every product in that category, they get 65% of the cost, for example. So it's grant based on technology helps even small business to implement the technology, even without know, because maybe they are expert in something else, but are quickly implement and quickly result.
Yes, yes, that's very true. And unfortunately, in Malta, these sort of measures are all tied to tax credits, as even Patrick mentioned, and it is something that both the MBB and even the Malta Chamber has been sort of mentioning for a couple of years now, that businesses are ultimately not interested in getting more tax credits to support these investments. They need grants.
Yeah, even the grant, if are too generic, the business get lost into the application, because, okay, you improve efficiency. What does that mean?
Yes.
I have to know, I have to study, I have to allocate time to understand. I have to, what does it mean improve efficiency? I'm doing another job. So, okay, if I change the windows, I have this. If I put solar panel, I have this. Okay, let's do it. So it's really connected with the technology.
Yes, yes. Thank you very much, everyone. We're right on time. Was the breakout sessions are closing at 10:50 and it's 10:49. So I thank you very much for your contributions. It was a very, very interesting discussion, and thank you for all your different perspectives. We should be transported back to the plenary session any second now. So if you'd like to go grab a quick coffee until the breakout session, until the conference resumes, please do so. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Let me also thank you. I could go on discussing with you for quite some time, because it's really interesting to hear your points of view.
Thank you. Gabriel, I'll be happy to send you a paper I'd read regarding how the Green Deal needs to be rethought to have stronger policy instruments.
Yes, please do.
Not necessarily more money, because as we saw with the agricultural policies, even though already there may not be enough money to achieve our targets, it's not just about spending money, because you can throw money at something and the implementation will be.
Yes. This is something that unfortunately we see with a lot of EU instruments, especially, for example, the development instruments from outside the EU when it comes to third countries, which show in billions and billions of euros, but with little results.
Yeah, I mean, we've got the problem that globally our climate targets are not high enough. But then there's the gap between the targets and the implementation. So even if we had the best and highest and most ambitious targets, actually implementing them effectively,
Yes,
we're back by 2 steps.
There's a divide.
We will certainly be taken back soon, right? Because
yes, I think the problem is that the breakout session on the future of the single market has still not wrapped up yet. The future of work is done, and Mark is still going on.
Because I mean, may I try? I would just start talking if I'm interrupted in between. Well, bad luck. But then I would like to raise one point. It's about the investment, because we were now saying it's important to have it accessible, to have the knowledge that there is even a grant, that it might be easier to have it on the local level. And in this regard, I was wondering about the role of the Recovery and Resilience Fund, because there you have on national level the funds that need to be reparted. And I just recently heard a Maltese member of European Parliament telling, for example, about government funds, government grants for energy efficiency audits. And I would like to know whether this information has been trickling down.
I think the scheme for energy audits is run by the Malta Enterprise and the government's Energy and Water Agency. It's been active for a couple of years now. Off the top of my head, I think it finances energy audits for SMEs up to €5,000, and it's a grant. It's not a tax credit. But
okay.
I'm not too familiar with the scheme, but I know that it's been renewed now.
Patrick can tell you.
Yes, Patrick, of course. Patrick is a certified energy auditor in Malta. So
sorry, but yes, this and one other grant is available. But with regards to the energy audits for the SMEs, the take-up has been very bad, because the companies don't see the value of getting a free energy audit.
Can you tell me why this is the case? Because for me, I always think
because they see it as a report which goes to sit on a shelf.
Even though you could have economic savings out of it, that it would make economically sense possibly.
But not direct. You need to take actions from the report.
Yes.
So there is a lot. As I said earlier, if companies are struggling to survive, for them it's not of particular interest to try and they will say, okay, this is great for the engineers to get some money through the scheme, but for me to bother you to stop my operations, to dedicate someone to provide the information, and then to get a report which will probably sit on the shelf, a large proportion of the companies very low take-up, unfortunately.
I see. Interesting. Okay, thanks.
And the comment that we have also received is that companies, especially the ones with limited funds, would much rather sort of focus their efforts on more productive activities like increasing their output than investing on internal looking measures such as energy efficiency.
Okay. Yeah, I see.
This was pre-COVID when demand was increasing. I don't know the situation now. Perhaps Patrick is more in touch with these businesses.